Today in the EU, controversial talks on borders, smuggling, and asylum procedures. This whole week has been dominated by migration-focused discussions in Brussels. And with the opening of the Justice and Home Affairs Council today, a packed EU migration policy agenda continues to be center stage. Key decisions include votes on fully extending Schengen membership to Romania and Bulgaria, and the revision of what law enforcement measures can be levied against migrant smugglers. What else is on the agenda? Hello and welcome. I'm your host, Giada Santana, and this is Today in the EU. I'm joined in the studio by politics reporter Nicoletta Ionta to go through the EU institutions' contentious migration policy debates and what might come out of them this week. Hello, Nico.
Hello, Giada.
So we've seen yesterday Hanna Virkkunen presenting a communication by the European Commission on migrants and migrants' instrumentalization. She talked about hybrid warfare. Usually, when I think of hybrid warfare, I really think of disinformation or cyber attacks. When did the new commission start associating migrants with weapons?
So, as you mentioned yesterday, the European Commission issued this communication supporting member states in combating the weaponization of migration.
Just to clarify here, this is what the Commission means by weaponization of migrants.
Europe must show solidarity with the member states affected by hybrid threats resulting from weaponization of migration and strengthening security at the EU's external borders. We will provide the necessary support to tackle the challenges.
I mean, this lexicon and this wording is not really new.
So what's the backstory?
I think it's useful to go back to 2021 for context. 2021 was a year that saw a major border crisis between Belarus and several other EU member states. And basically what happened is that Belarus was accused of orchestrating a situation in retaliation of EU sanctions that were imposed after the 2020 presidential election in the country that saw Lukashenko elected as president. And basically Belarus was accused of having created this situation at the border in which you basically had an increase in the number of migrants crossing the border with the EU. The crisis brought the issue of migration instrumentalization at the forefront of the EU agenda. And at the time, the EU didn't really have an approach to respond to these scenarios. And in response, the Commission introduced a series of proposals, and it has been doing that for the past years. I remember in November 2021 already, von der Leyen was describing this crisis as a cruel form of hybrid threat from Belarus. And the term has since shaped, in a way, the EU lexicon on this issue. Along these lines, it's also interesting and important to recall when, in the context of this communication, that Poland just in October barred refugees from claiming asylum after crossing the border from Belarus. And Polish authorities justified this move by basically citing warnings that Russia and its allies were using migrants as a threat and as a tool to take advantage from the EU asylum system, and in some ways just having this kind of like destabilizing effect on EU societies at large.
And about this, reading this communication, it seems that the threat of hybrid warfare will justify EU countries that want to suspend asylum laws and laws against collective expulsion due to so-called events of force majeure. So what could be the consequences?
So basically what the Commission is saying in this communication is that in these so-called exceptional situations, member states can and should be doing what is necessary to defend themselves by these hybrid attacks, so defined, and may adopt exceptional measures, such as, for example, limit the right to asylum. Of course, the Commission is saying that these measures should be proportional and should be temporary. So there are some limitation to that. And of course, EU member states should always abide by EU law and by the humanitarian principles and by the convention and all that.
And on the limitations that we just talked about, Virkkunen remained extremely vague.
This is so exceptional situation that the member states, they made also, for example, limit exercise of the rights to ICE asylum in this kind of situation, but in strict conditions and also in legal limits. And it's of course very important that when the member states, they are taking that kind of measures, that they are also consulting always the Commission, and they also share the situational awareness with the neighbor countries, and we can also act together.
And in the context of this paper, Virkkunen mentions support for Eastern European countries who have to deal with the challenge of irregular migration. That seems very topical, seeing today's vote on extending Schengen to Romania and Bulgaria, the only two countries in continental Europe that experience border controls. Can you tell us why migration concerns were among the reasons for this standoff?
Yes, today the Council is expected to set a date for lifting land border checks for Bulgaria and Romania. This is a long-awaited conclusion to a saga that has dragged on for years. A quick recap. Basically, Bulgaria and Romania joined the EU in 2007, but did not become part of the Schengen area, sparking years and years of debate and opposition, notably from Austria, because they always cited migration and irregular entry concerns when it comes to Bulgaria and Romania, which was something very particular that was proposed to the two countries. And
so air, sea, but not land.
Exactly. So land was still a no-no for Austria, and that was set in place on the 31st of March. So from that moment, you could fly, you could take, it's
ferry, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. But land was still a huge, huge issue. And last month on November 22nd, Austria lifted, this veto, acknowledging the progress that the both countries have made in curbing irregular migration. There was a joint declaration from Hungary, Austria, and Romania and Bulgaria that was agreed in Budapest last month that paved the way for today to happen.
And how do you see the vote panning out? I mean, it's hardly a coincidence that we receive a communication yesterday highlighting resources Eastern European countries can resort to address migration challenges. And today we have this vote on Schengen.
I think the outcome today is expected to be positive because there was a consensus on the fact that it is time for Bulgaria and Romania to join Schengen. And with, Austria lifting its veto, there is not an obstacle for that. But it is also true that really just yesterday afternoon, the Netherlands expressed some last-minute concern over their entry. So I think today it will be interesting to follow what will happen.
Today also marks the deadline for member states to submit their migration implementation plans. Can you tell us more about what they consist in?
The idea behind the implementation plans is for member states to have a game plan for the next year and a half that the Commission can take into consideration also when it comes to holding them accountable. And so, as I understood, it's basically a reflection of the gaps and need assessments that was carried out by the Commission for every member state a couple of months ago. And basically is the idea that member states will try to address all the gaps and the needs in their implementation plans when it comes to implementing the pact, the new pact on migration.
So to put it simply, the European Commission sent notes to different member states saying, this is what you need to do to respect the migration pact. Fill this framework to let us know how you're prepared to do so. The question is, have countries done their homework?
Today at the JHA Council, there will be a general update. I mean, just, in my view, there will be countries that will be more hesitant, or they will express some discontent. But because they are countries that maybe didn't agree fully with the entire pact. So I think it also comes down to that. And we may already know who these countries are. Maybe the ones that voted against or like that.
Lastly, Virkkunen's communication also mentions the approval of a new migrant smuggling directive that will be discussed. The previous migrant smuggling directive traces back to more than 20 years ago to 2002. So I'd say that it's only fair that states have proposed changes. However, some of these modifications worry humanitarian organizations. Tell us more about what these updates consist in and why they have raised concerns.
So, yes, you're right. Member states will adopt a position tomorrow on this new directive, which is basically a piece of legislation that establishes minimum rules to combat and prevent migrant smuggling. In terms of timeline, this was, as you said, something proposed in November 2023, and then after tomorrow's decision, we will go to the so-called trilogues negotiation with the European Parliament. These new rules will replace the 2000 legal framework on the matter, and as the Commission really feels that there is a need to modernize and reinforce what's in place now, basically. One key concern when it comes to migrant smuggling and the way that the Commission has been kind of framing it and talking about it, especially from NGOs, is the fact that there is a strong emphasis on migrant smuggling as the primary driver of irregular migration, when, according to NGOs and experts, it's important to provide legal pathways instead of criminalizing migrant smuggling. I've been talking to some people this week about it, and I think what's really important for them is the fact that the new text amends the definition of facilitation of irregular entry, transit, or stay, which is now criminalized when the person requests, receives, or accepts directly or indirectly a financial benefit or a material benefit.
And concretely, who would bear the brunt of this change?
The migrants, but also maybe humanitarian aid workers. According to NGOs, this new definition could potentially broaden the scope of criminalization, as this definition of facilitation is very broad, and that can open to the criminalization of mutual aid, as well as in situations in which migrants cannot afford maybe to pay for their journey and maybe undertake small tasks in exchange for a discount or for a free ride, So it's really really broad, and it takes into consideration many situations that can happen.
Especially because it's quite common for smugglers to put migrants in charge of driving water vehicles.
This directive also not only covers entry, but stay and transit. So it's really broad, and it's very different from what the UN protocol about smuggling says in this. I think also there are many problems that were highlighted when it comes to this new directive, and one of them is the fact that there is no clear binding language excluding human rights defenders, as the humanitarian exception is moved to the recitals of this new directive, when in the last directive was part of the articles. So one important thing is the protection of humanitarian workers. As you know, this exception is not as strong as it was.
Mm-hmm. Even Virkanen only talked about transport operators, which seems to be a very broad term that could include both humanitarian organizations in the Mediterranean, for instance, and smugglers leaving Libya.
I think what's important to keep in mind, that's where the criticism lays, is the fact that this directive goes further, and it doesn't really respond to what was said during these years and what was mentioned by civil society and humanitarian organizations that work in these situations. So there is a risk for the scope of criminalization to be broadened. So that's really what we're looking at.
And so looking at this busy EU migration policy this week, we didn't even have time to get into the asylum halting procedures started by different countries, but that's not something that we will do. Go read the reporting that Nicoletta has done on our website. Taking a step back and looking at all of this, what's your assessment? Where's, this window change when it comes to EU migration policy?
I think it's really clear where the Commission is going. I don't think there is different from what was being done in the last term. We will see the implementation of the pact. We will see these proposals going forward, and a stronger focus on, weaponization of migration, externalization, security of the borders. This is really the direction we are going.
Thank you, Nicoletta.
Thank you, Giada.
This was Euractiv's podcast, Today in the EU. Sound design by Miriam Sáenz de Tejada and Niels de Keukelaere. Research and production by Charles Cohen. Visit Euractiv to stay on top of the latest news and sign up for our newsletters. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and your favorite streaming platforms. Don't forget to subscribe and give us a review. It will really help us spread the word about our work. See you tomorrow. As part of our commitment to accuracy, inclusion, and transparency, Euractiv is part of the Trust Project.